Good morning and welcome to Kerry Lore. Kerry Lore this time comes from Adrigal, where I was before, and before I was talking to Sean Nicholson. And today I'm talking to Sean Nicholson because I found him a very interesting man, and he had a lot of interesting stories to tell me. So just to catch up on some more of Sean's stories, I made a trip down here this morning. And Sean, you're living in the most beautiful place. We're looking out at Adrigal Harbour, and the sun is shining, and it's a beautiful place here to live.
Yes, indeed, Maris. It's not bad at all, I suppose.
And when we spoke the last time, we were discussing some of the traditions and the beliefs of the people down here locally, and you told me some fascinating stories, and you have another one again today now for me.
Yes, indeed, Maris, I have indeed. And as you said, we are here in Adrigal this morning. And back in the 1700s, or probably before it, Adrigal was known as the parish of Clonlarns, or Clown Lore. And it took me a long time to find out who this Lore O'Sullivan was, but eventually I got to the bottom of it. It seems that Lawrence O'Sullivan was a legitimate son of one of the O'Sullivan Bear chiefs. And at that time, any illegitimate son could not, shall we say, accede to property or lands, and therefore he couldn't stay in Dunby, which was the seat of the O'Sullivans, and he was moved to Adrigal. Of course, he was not disowned by the O'Sullivans, but because it was English law at the time, he could not inherit the property. And when he came to Adrigal, I don't know that he lived in Adrigal or not, but at least he was, shall we say, the landlord, I suppose, at the time, in collecting the dues from the people. And that is why the Adrigal people were called the Clown Lore, or Lawrence's clan. So that is something that too many people don't know about. Even though up to 40 years ago I used visit a lady in the Castledown Bear parish. I was a postman there for back in the 1960s, and every day she'd say, "How is everybody in Clonlarns this morning?" She was a very old lady in her 90s, but her mother came from the parish of Adrigal, and she never forgot the name of Clown Lore. So not too many people speak about it today.
I suppose that's where you learned a lot of, or where you gathered your stories, being a postman and going around and meeting these people.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, because, people, they knew me so well, and I knew them so well that they spoke openly about many of these things. If we were a stranger, they would be rather slow in telling you these things, because they'd be suspicious that we were looking for the information for some other means.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no problem in discussing these things with the people. And the last time I told you some stories from famine times, and
you did. You told me some interesting stories about the little pishogues, the little.
That's right. Yes. Well, we'll discuss them too later, Maris.
All right. Okay.
I have a good few of them today as well, I think. But the townland of Domlav, which is where the Adrigal church is built, many years ago, I suppose it would be around the famine times. There was a man and his wife living in a small little house, and they had no farm, but they had a field adjacent to the house where they used to plant their potato garden and their vegetables and so on. And in this particular instance, there was a part of the field which would be planted with potatoes the year before, and the following year it would be planted with oats or wheat or some type of grain. And this particular day, the husband was gone fishing. He was gone fishing to the Callagher, and we'll talk about the Callagher later on. And that would be shore fishing, of course. And the woman of the house was doing her own work, and she was brushing up her floor, and she had a basin up on the table, or a dish of some sort, and it was full of grain. And she was about to go out in the field and plant her grain while her husband was gone fishing. And before she had time to gathered up the grain, a travelling man came to the door and he was looking for food. And he also was looking for food for his wife and children, who he said were just up the lane and who were desperate for something to eat. And she told him truthfully that she didn't have any food in the house, telling him how her husband was gone fishing and that probably he'd have fish and that she'd give him fish when the husband would come back.
Mm-hmm.
But he was so hungry that he couldn't wait, and he noticed the grain up on the table, and he said, "Would you please give me 2 fists of the grain," so that he could take it away and boil it and give it to his family. And she was so taken aback by what he said that she felt so sorry for him that she cut the bowl of oats and she handed it over to him. And she told him, "Take it all." And of course, once he was gone, he thanked her. She found herself in a terrible predicament because her husband was gone fishing, and she was after saying that she'd have the oats planted when he'd come back. So the first thing she did was to brush up the floor and gather all the chaff and the bits of straw and so on. And she put it into another dish. And she asked, I suppose, God to help her, that something good would come out of it. So she went out and she planted all the chaff and the bits of oats and shook it all over the field where she was about to set the grain before this man called. And she left it in God's hands, of course, and her husband came home. The first question he asked her was that she set the grain, and she said she did. She couldn't, of course, tell him what happened. And the weeks passed by anyway, and one morning, fine morning, she looked out her window and she saw her little field getting green. And as the days went on, of course, the oats started to grow where there was no oats planted. And it was said afterwards that they had more grain that year than they ever had in their life. So I suppose you could say it was a reward for a good deed.
Wasn't that fascinating? Indeed.
Yes,
That's a
indeed,
lovely
Maris.
story.
That's right, yes. And
Yeah.
there's another story now, well, probably connected in a way, but again goes back to those times. There was this man lived in the townland of Drumjarvin, here in Adrigal, and he had a wife and 2 children to support. He had a very small farm, 3 cows, and of course the cows was very important because they provided milk for the family and provided butter, of course, when they made the churn and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And all his family, the children they all got sick one after the other, and they were all sick together, and they had very little milk because in the winter time, in olden days, you see, the farmers would keep a cow milking for the winter. The cow would be known as a stripper.
Mm-hmm.
I never heard the word stripper today.
Never heard that, no.
And the stripper anyway wouldn't have sufficient milk for all these children as regards drinking milk and so on. They probably would only have enough for maybe for the baby or the youngest of the children, and indeed just enough for, as they used to say themselves, to colour the tea, little milk for the tea. And on this particular day, things were getting very bad, and the neighbours came and helped them. But of course they couldn't help him very much because they too would have lots of children and they'd be in the same situation as the guards' cattle. They wouldn't have a lot of cattle and there'd be no milk in the winter except for as I have said already, the milk provided by the stripper cow. So on this particular morning the man was very downhearted, of course, and he was faced with probably some of his children were going to die if they didn't get milk, or they'd have no butter or anything, they'd have no, what you call, nutritional food. And one morning when he opened the cow byre, there was 4 cows in the cow byre, where there was 3 prior to that. And the man was surprised, of course, and he ran in, he told his wife, and she ran out with a bucket. And they noticed that the cow was dropping milk down on the floor. And he milked the cow, and he got a second bucket, and he filled it again. And of course they were delighted and hoping that the cow would stay with them if they could keep her at all, keep her locked in. But there was no need to do it because the cow was there again the following day and remained there for about 6 weeks afterwards until the children got better and were able to run around and walk around again. And of course, a lot of the neighbours came around and nobody knew where the cow came from. And they all said, well, we never saw this cow in this locality before. And after 6 weeks, one morning, he went to let out his cows, and the cow was gone. It's why we refer to her as the mysterious cow. Nobody seemed to know where she came from or where she went.
Imagine that, yes.
Yes, indeed. And the neighbours at the time were asked to see where did your man get his cow, and they said that it was the good people who bought the cow. The good people were the fairies, of course.
Yes.
And when they thought to see that she was no longer needed, which she wasn't, she was taken away again by the good people. So that is a story from the times past.
Where did you hear that story?
Well, there was my house here. There were a lot of people, times gone by, used to visit my house. My grandfather lived to be a very old man, and a lot of people used to come in to see him. And they'd be telling these stories around the fireside at night.
So you're the third generation living in this house?
I am indeed, yes. My grandfather lived to be 99 years of age.
Oh, sure.
And he was
a perfect background.
He was, but the thing about it was, you see, that at the time people should have asked him a lot more about history, but sad to say, whether they did or not, there's not very much recorded about it. Yes. My mother, of course, always lived in the house with him. She cared for him in his old age, and she said he was very interesting, that he used to always talk about the chiefly in politics of the House of Commons and Home Rule and so on. He had all that, and he could relate it.
He'd all the up-to-date politics at that time.
He had indeed. He was a great man for reading novels, and his father was a Cornishman who came to the His mines back in the early 1800s. So he had a lot of history, but like a lot more people, I suppose, they didn't, shall we say, record it.
They didn't write it down at the time, yeah. It's a shame.
It is indeed.
Yes, isn't it?
It was a shame, as right, Paris, but that's how it was. But still, on the other hand, there's some of the stories lived on, of course.
You have another one for me?
I suppose, to be more or less, tell you some fairy tales, I suppose, following up on the last one. Some time ago, a lady told me that at that time people used to go to fairs during the night, so that they'd be there in the early morning for the sale of the cattle and so on. And a lot of people, of course, went to the fairs there. It was a social outing every month, or maybe once or twice a year. And this man was going to Bantry once on a saddle horse, and matches were very scarce at the time. We had to get a box of matches. So anyone that would be smoking a pipe would stop by at a house near the side of the road, and he'd go in and light his pipe from the fire and have a bit of a chat and go on his way. But on this particular night, this man called to this house, and as he stepped at the gate, he had lovely music playing, and he was mad in music, shall we say, and he said that he would have to go in and see what was happening. So as soon as he lifted the latch of the door, there was a set lining up on the floor, and this girl threw her hand around him and she said, "You'll dance the set with us." And of course he said he would, because he was very musical. And they danced the set up and down the floor, and during the dance he noticed a small little man, probably a leprechaun, up under the fireplace, the clower they used to call the fireplace at the time. And he noticed he was playing the most beautiful music. He was playing the fiddle. And in appreciation of his playing, he put his hand in his pocket, and he had two pennies in his pocket, and he put it up on the flag near where the man was playing. And he continued on anyway. But there was about an hour past at this time, and he said, "God, sure," he said, "I'll never be in time for Bantry, I better go away." So he left the music house, and the girl he was dancing with, he never before saw. She was a beautiful looking girl. And he said his goodbyes and he went on his way. And he was gone about 3 miles, and he was taking a shortcut through the mountain where there was a big turn in the road, and he was saving himself a little bit of time by going through the shortcut. And as he was going through the shortcut, he met 2 girls, and they're breaking their heart laughing when they saw him coming.
Why was that?
I'll come to that now. And it seems all of a sudden it dawned on him that this was the girl that he was dancing with in this house prior to leaving for his journey to Bantry. And he thought it was rather strange, and he went on his way, and he thought I'd get up to him, but he didn't see him anymore. And he went to the fair, and he came home quite early because he was so surprised that he realised that there was something wrong that he couldn't figure out. So he called into the house, and he coming home, and the old man and his wife were sitting by the fireside, and it didn't dawn on him that he never saw him in the house the night before when the dance was on. And he was there for a while anyway, and he was hoping that they'd say something about the dance, and they didn't. And eventually he plucked up a bit of courage, and he said, "Wasn't it a great night here last night?" And they both looked at him, and they said, What are you talking about?" "Oh," he said, "I was here last night," he said, for the set dancing, and telling him about the lovely little man who was playing the fiddle up at the fireside where the man of the house was sitting at the time. And they couldn't understand him, and he couldn't understand him either. And she said, "My dear man," she said, "don't be furious." She said, "I got a telegram yesterday evening," she said, "that my lovely daughter died in America." And immediately he realised that that was the girl that he was dancing with the night before, that he met on the mountain on his way to Bantry.
Well, no, that's very interesting.
So that is a story that has been handed down here in the parish.
Yes. Sean, stories relating to farming around here beside you. Do you have any stories about?
Well, I'll tell you a story that was told to me some time ago. It is related to farming in a sense, and it is related to fairies and fairy music as well. You see, the farmers of old were, I think, more attentive to their cows, and they gave them more care than they do now as regards putting them in and feeding them and so on and so forth. Because if a farmer lost a cow that time, it was very hard to get money to buy another cow. But this is slightly different. The neighbours, were very supportive of one another as regards farming. They had the mehels, and they came together when they were cutting the turf, and came together cutting the hay, mowing the hay, and so on. And on this particular night, it is a story where a farmer had a cow which was about to calf, and like now, they were keeping an eye on her, see that things would go right. And the neighbour came to visit, and neighbouring farmer, and they went out to see these cows at 12 o'clock at night. This was in the springtime of the year, and the cows would be out anyway. And nothing was happening, so they came in home, and they had a cup of tea, I suppose, and they went out again about 2 o'clock. And going out at 2 o'clock that time was a very dangerous thing to do, because the fairy was all around us, and they were in danger, maybe if they didn't conduct themselves and go to the right place, and not to travelling across certain paths where fairies would be probably travelling. And they sat down under this big oak tree, and they had, I suppose, a smoke and a chat, and all of a sudden they had this most beautiful music coming up from the sea. And after a while, it lasted probably half an hour or more, and then there was silence, and the next thing was there was loud talking, and they couldn't distinguish what language they were speaking, not even one word. And the talk got louder and louder. They were coming near them, but of course they didn't see anything. And then it stopped. And as the storyteller said to me, "'Tis then the cracking started." And of course, what he meant by that was they had the spades were out, and they were turning the garden. That would be turning the potato garden, turning the field, the barn as they used to call it, and making the ridges. And the noise you see that the spades used to make when we were turning the side over, that was the cracking, the referred to. And it seems there was an amount of people working because there was an amount of noise and there were a lot of people working in this field. And they were stunned, of course, and they weren't speaking to one another at all. They were so taken up with all this talk and music and noise. And then, after another while, more music started. And I think the first music, there were old Irish airs that were played, and the next one, there were real jigs and hornpipes. And it's said that one of the tunes they played was called Rina Shioga, the King of the Fairies. So the King of the Fairies must be there that night, and they were playing the tune in his honour. So then it was coming up to the dawn of day, of course, and these men were delighted because they didn't know what was going to happen next. And this music faded away over Bantry Bay, away out towards Swiddy Island, and it went off in the distance. So I suppose the fairies went somewhere else the following night with this lovely music. So that is a story that was told by two men who were minding a cow at 2 o'clock in the morning. So now that's...
So they were bound to have had experiences finding stories. Tell me, the sea, we're looking out at it right here. Was there many sea tragedies around here? Was there any stories about the sea?
Well, there was a boat lost just out of as we look out at Adrigole Harbour, it's a place known as Point of Moor. It's a point of land sticking out in the sea, that's why it is called Point of Moor. And there was a boat wrecked here in 1876. She was a bark. She came from New Orleans with a cargo of cotton. And she lost the rudder in Bantry Bay, and of course a rudderless ship can go anywhere, and she crashed onto the rocks here at Point of Moor. And it seems that there was nobody lost, but the boat was wrecked, and it was only quite recently that some divers found some copper at the bottom of the sea where she crashed. Copper, of course, she was probably having some copper on board as well. So there was no tragedies, but no losses rather. But in 1895, there was a local boat from the townland of Dorini that went hake fishing, and this particular night, it was on the 11th of October 1895, it was the fair day in Castledown. And they left their townland of Dorini to go fishing at night to see if they were fishing for hake. And there was 5 on board, 5 neighbours, one from each house. And in the morning, they'd be usually back maybe 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and no trace of the men appeared. And of course there was a search organised, and there was a song composed about it, and there was 2 of the men found in the boat, and 3 were lost. And one of the men that was lost was a Morris Abbott. He was an uncle to my mother. He was my granduncle, in other words. And his body was never found. And there was a local lady, I think she was a Cowley woman. She composed a song, and I suppose to quote some of the song for you, I'll read it out. It gives the story better than I could give it. Young people of this neighbourhood, attend both young and old, unto those feeding lines to you I will unfold. Those 5 young men lost their lives, it grieves me for to say, close by the shores of Dorini, which lies near Bantry Bay. And the 11th of October last, in all in this present year, that was the night of a terrible tale to the county far and near. For as the sun had gone to rest, they went their nets to set, which leave their parents now to weep in sad and deep regret. The night was dark and dreary as they returned for the shore. The sea it ran mountains high against them more and more. But when they got to the Swan Rock, it grieves me for to tell, 'twas there they met their awful fate by the dash of a deadly swell. 'Twas in the following morning, just at the break of day, when Peter Downey opened his door and to his sons did say, A boat lies distressed to rise, now we will go and see, and if she lies at our lot, we'll have her at safety. But when they reached this lonely boat, and closed her side by side, 'twas there they met this awful fate, which struck them with surprise. Two bodies in a drowned state, and her they could behold, which filled their hearts with terror, most dreadful to be told. O Lord, it was an awful fright, when a boat and two were found, upon the strand of Blue Hill, 2 miles from Bantry town. The other 3, with deep regret, filled a watery grave. May God receive their souls on high, good Christians for them pray. Those 5 young men were in their prime, and healthy for to view. 3 of them were Sullivans, Tim Shea, and Abbott too. For they were in the prime of life, as the public papers tell. I hope until the end of time, in heaven their souls will dwell. Now to conclude those feeling lines, good Christians for them pray. May the Blessed Virgin Mary intercede for their souls this day, and to her Son, the King on high, their parents to console, who lies weeping for their darling boys, who were lost in the rainy shore. So of course that was very sad, because 5 young boys from any townland was a dreadful thing to happen, particularly in those times. Morris Abbott was the man who was going to inherit the farm from his parents, but
it didn't happen.
It didn't happen, and his brother, who was my grandfather, was in Lowell in Massachusetts at the time, and he came back, of course, and he took over the farm. So fate plays a part in lots of people's lives.
Sean, it was lovely listening to your stories, but you are going to finish with some of the local pishogues that you have for me.
I will give you the pishogues right away, but before I do that, I mentioned earlier about the Callagher.
Oh yes, that's right.
The Callagher is a place, not a townland, but it's a place along the shore. There'd be different places called the Callagher. It was where people fished from the rocks, especially in low water. And the fish you would catch in the Callagher were conner. They were red fish, and as my mother would never give a child a conner to eat for his dinner, because they were full of bones, and there was a likelihood of the child choking. And indeed, for an older person too, you want to be fairly careful when you would eat a conner. But they also used to catch small pollock, which were known as crowhogs, and sometimes you get one of those black pollock. I should say the crowhog was a small pollock, not a small conner. And the black pollock would be known as a grey sea. And they would be fish that you would also get from the Callagher, fishing from the Callagher. And sometimes in probably July or August, you would catch a lot of mackerel from the Callagher as well. So today, I see a lot of signposts pointing toward the shore about fishing and so on, but the word Callagher don't appear anywhere, and it's rather sad that they don't, because it was a very important place for people of the past who was always, when they had a chance from the farming work, would go particularly on a Sunday to fish for these fish from the Callagher. Of course, I'll tell you one story now about pishogues. There was one time a neighbour of mine went visiting, shall we say, a Scorreek thing, and when he arrived at the house, he didn't know what was in store for him, because they were after killing a pig in this particular house. And killing a pig was a very big job altogether, and there was a lot of neighbours came in, and the man who killed the pig, the butcher, would be a special man in the parish who was good at the job, shall we say. And anybody who visited the house when the pig was killed, whether they were there in business or whatever brought him there, they'd always get a bit of the pig going home. It was the done thing, it was a custom. And this particular man, he was full of pishogue, shall we say, himself, and he joined in the shall we say, in the work of killing the pig and so on. And when he was going home, of course, he got his bit of bacon wound up in a paper bag. That's what the paper bags were used for that time. And also they had, you see, there was a pishogue attached to this. And when he left the house, when he came down to the main road from the house where the pig was killed, there was a hare leapt out before him in the road. And a hare to leap out before you at that time, you see, was dangerous. There was a hare in the form of a wicked spirit or some fairy or other. And people, they thought it was bad luck if they met one of these at night. So this man was a very religious man. He took out his rosary bead and he blessed himself, and he prayed for everyone that ever travelled on this road. And he made a big circle on the road, you see, and with the rosary bead, so that the hair wouldn't come inside of the circle. So they went on further anyway, and there was water crossing the road, you see. And these wicked spirits, you see, these superstitious hares could never cross water. They'd have to, shall we say, make a detour, so to speak. Yeah. But when he went on about another half a mile, he met the hare again. I suppose it was another hare, but he thought it was the same one. So when he went along anyway, he, as himself said, that the hare was standing in his head and there was cold sweat pouring down his back with the height of fright. And he was keeping a good hold of the bacon in the meantime. And when he went home, his wife noticed that he was very shocked looking, and she said, "There's something happened to you," she said. And he went on to tell her a story. "Oh," she said, "I'm surprised at you," she said. "You made a bad mistake." And he said, what mistake did I make? He was a man that hardly ever made a mistake. "Oh," she said, "before you left the house, you should have got a grain of salt and shook it on the meat," she said, "and there'd be no fairies bother you." So the salt was a deterrent for fairies.
Frightened away the fairies,
yes.
yeah.
So that was, of course, Pishogs, of course, then again. And I remember myself as a young boy with my mother visiting my grandfather's house. And there were some visitors to the house on a particular day. And the custom was always, when I leave the house, you walked out to the gate with these people and bid them goodbye and so on. But before they had a chance to go as far as the gate, there was a whirlwind came, a wind from the northwest. And of course the whirlwind would blow things around the place. And I saw my grandfather to take off his hat and throw it after the whirlwind. You see, to the people at the time, they wouldn't refer to it as a whirlwind at all. It was a shigrihe, a fairy wind. And by throwing a hat or a cap or a handkerchief after this wind, you were taking away the bad luck of the place.
Oh, yes.
And in other words, you were asking the fairies to take away whatever bad luck they brought in, to take it away with them again. And by throwing the hat after the wind, that it seemed that done the trick. Whether it did or not, I don't know, but I thought it did anyway. So.
It's very interesting indeed. Have you one more to finish up with?
Yeah. Could I tell you some Irish curses, man?
Oh, do. Please, I would be delighted to hear.
Yes, I suppose I'd be the first man to curse on radio, Kerry, but I think myself, these curses weren't curses at all in the real sense of the word. They were what you would call outbursts of anger, shall we say. And I can illustrate the curses by way of a little story. And the first one I'll tell you is that there was this woman one time. She was down by the seashore, just down from the house here now. She's known as Tralahan. And when you have a big strand, you see a lot of people were, at that time, they were picking the pecans. Today they refer to the pecan as the perries. The perry is only a part of a word. It is periwinkle would be the right name. Mm-hmm. Some people would call it the periwinkle. I don't know if they're wrinkles or not, but the pecans, they were known as at the time. And this particular woman, she had a bucket full of pecans, and she went on to fill another bucket. But while she was doing so, some prime boy put the bucket aside. And it's very hard to put anything aside in this big strand. But the way they used to do it was they'd cut a few strips of seaweed and they'd throw it up in the bucket. And as much seaweed that you could catch in one hand that would put up in the bucket would be known as a thruple of seaweed. That was the Irish word that was used, a thruple. And anyway, after a bit, she saw this young fellow laughing, and she knew that he had some hand in putting the hide of the pecans, and she stood out for him and she looked up at him and she said in Irish, by way of the curse, "Lahana na lahogyort," that we may be as flat as a flatfish. That was her.
That's very good.
That was her wish. And then there was another wish, you see, on the thrashing. During the thrashing times, and probably before the thrashers, when they used to thrash with the flail, there'd be, we'll say, talking about the thrashing, there was a lot of people involved, of course. Some people making the reek of straw, and more of them cutting the sheaves of straw, and more of them, the Pat Jabbar was holding the bag to get the grain when it was coming out through the little shutter on the side of the thrasher. And of course, this man wouldn't mind his business. I suppose he was discussing the football match that was played the day before with the neighbour, and some of the grain went out around the haggart, and the farmer noticed it, and he shouted at one man, he said, "Scour on punnincoot, that we may get the fright of the shaft, or the fright of the shaft to you." You know, and I suppose if the shaft was telling a story, it would be, you see, when the shaft separates from the grain, you see, it's I suppose a terrible shock to the shaft and to the grain, shall we say. And that was the wish for him. And then people going to the hill, you see, bringing down sheep. They'd be almost down and into the lowlands with the sheep, and usually it just happened when one of the sheep might break away. And of course that meant going up again the following day for the one sheep to bring her down as well. And when she'd escape, you know, the shepherd would look after her, and he'd say, "Bask in the bucket." And the bask in the bucket meant the fall of the male goat ewe. And if you ever saw goats in the hill, you'd seldom ever see them falling, because they're very agile through the rocks and so on. But if they did fall, it would be a terrible fall altogether. They'd be probably killed. So that was the wish that the farmer gave his sheep, was that he get the same fall as the male goat got. Bask in the bucket.
And I think when it's said in Irish, it even sounds stronger, doesn't it?
That's
You know,
right,
it when it comes out in the Irish,
Yeah,
it's very definite. Sean, it has been wonderful talking to you again.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed your stories, and I enjoyed listening to you. And I think we'll do this again later on
Yes,
at a future date.
Well, yes, indeed. Right on. I'll do my best to help you. I'll probably resurrect a few more stories in the meantime, and I have a few more too, but as time don't permit us today, there'll always be another time.
There will, of course, Sean. And thank you again very much.
Thanks.